My name is Josh. I'm currently serving as the college young adult pastor at Dallas Chinese Bible Church.
I'm Will Chu. I'm with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. I'm the Associate Regional Director in the Central Region.
Cool.
Pastor.
Also serve with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. I feel like I met Jesus at a pretty early age. There was a lot of hardship in my life. In college, though, was the place where I was challenged to take steps of risk and steps of faith outside of what was normal for me. So I think high school, junior high, was a time of forming and becoming the foundations were being formed for me. And the things that I reflect on even today about learning about how to love people really well, being in community really well.
Are there things special about Christian girl coming to college?
It's not as much about gender per se as about this new experience. I think it's actually the overriding experience of being like by yourself is kind of overrides even like gender things that happen. There are some differences, but I feel like that is actually bigger. It's this brand new experience of being on your own, making choices on your own, and deciding for yourself how you want to live your life. My sophomore year was the first year that I decided that Jesus was pearl of great worth more than anything else I would want. So that was something I decided my second year, even though I'd been, going to church my first year and going to fellowship, going to Bible study. The first year is almost like you're just trying to figure out where you are and what's happening. It's hard to even think about life. But that second year, a lot of people make decisions about like their major and their path and their choices. And that year is really important.
Well, tell us that what would you give advice to parents whose children would be going to college?
I would say like one thing is as your children are growing in their faith, I would also encourage for the parents to keep growing in their faith as well. It's there's a way in which that the students are experiencing new adventures and new opportunities in college, but in the same way that I think that adults also keep growing as well, and to share that with their children, maybe over the phone call or to talk to them and to pray for them. I would say also just to ask their children about not just school success and school kind of related things, but emotional, physical, mental health are kind of rising in concerns for students in this generation. So asking about those things as well as spiritual health as well. So those kind of combinations of health for this child, for the student are critical pieces, especially for nowadays, this generation. They're thinking about those things. So I think having those conversations are really important. I would say also just encouraging students to take risks. So maybe nowadays, risk-taking may not be as high because safety and stability feel like higher values for students of this generation. So encouraging them to take risks in community, to spend time maybe going to a fellowship event or spend time going to a church event that's being being put on by a local church, to try to get to know some people. They don't have to meet everybody on the college, but try to meet some people, maybe a few new friends. That would be really important. And I think also one last thing I would say is probably just before they go off to college, like having each other ask questions. So maybe just writing down a couple questions that you want to ask your children, and having your children write questions that you want to ask your parents, and then just to trade and just to see what kind of questions are coming up. Maybe there's concerns about how you're thinking about the future, or maybe there's something about that you want to know. So I would say begin to develop some of those rhythms and dialogues so that you can establish that when they go off to college, so it doesn't feel like it's such a jarring change and switch for.
I would say a big part of it is to remember, like instead of the prodigal son, look at it as the good father, right? The good father allows his children to make decisions, good or bad. And they live with the consequences. And I think that's kind of ties into with what Esther was saying. Like year two is because to me, in my limited observation, it's like year one, they're making all of their own decisions. So then by year two, you're reaping the consequences of that, right? If your GPA is high enough to get into the program that you want, like, good on you. But if you skipped a lot of classes and had a lot of fun, like, you're gonna make up for it. Year two, you're gonna realize, like, oh my goodness, if I want a degree or if I want to finish well, I need to buckle down. So I think for parents to be reminded to show grace, this is definitely an opportunity for them to extend grace. Your kids will make mistakes. We make mistakes. We make mistakes against our Heavenly Father all the time. And I think it's just understanding that. I think piggybacking off of what Will said, we have to start treating them like adults, right? So it's like, hey, I think part of that is even asking permission, right? Would you like to hear my advice? So I would say listen more. In the same way, like the good father didn't question the prodigal son and say, what did you do with the money? It's always an embrace. Let's draw you close, and then we'll work on that other stuff later. So I think there's just this, it's the perfect opportunity for us to extend to them grace.
There's probably like Asian values of, perfectionism, of being like a good child, of doing well or success or stability. So I think there's some of these are good values. They're not like it's like bad or whatnot. So I think there's ways in which those things can be passed on in a way that could be unhealthy. So I think ways in which to how do you pass that forward, but also pass on, like what Josh was saying, just grace and mercy, and also just being kind to yourself. So I think just ways in which they can be vulnerable and open. I think that kind of model could be helpful.
Somehow it seems like mothers doing everything, and they're the one who stay in contact with kids in college. And if you have some advice for fathers?
Well, I think like what Will was saying earlier about failure is actually really helpful, especially from Asian fathers. I think even for me, like with my own father, like having my dad say, "Oh, I'm really sorry. I was really selfish at that time," was actually a very healing thing for me when I had to talk to him about some hurts from the past. That actually was what helped me be like, oh, I can understand where you're coming from more. They become more human. Mm-hmm. And there's can be grace extended on both sides.
Parents are worried, but they probably cannot talk about it. What should parents tell them about opposite sex or even genders, confusions about sex?
But just saying, like, you don't have to know everything. I think there's pressure for maybe parents or people who are in authority to feel like they have to know everything, or to know how to like answer every one of those places to try to prevent something from happening. And I think that could be one place of just this, as you mentioned from the start, is kind of like anxiety. And so I would say that do not worry. That's the first thing. I would say secondly, learn on your own as well. Like maybe read some books, get some resources about like what is happening on the campus culture in the world currently, about gender identity, about same-sex attraction, some of those types of things, sexuality, sex. Like I know those are maybe more taboo topics in maybe the Chinese Heritage Church settings, but there are lots of good resources out there to like learn about some of the language and understanding for them to just beginning to know what to say and what to ask. Because maybe you don't even know where to begin. It's like, I just see this thing, this post, or it's something on the news and it's very confusing. But to understand some of that, to have similar language so that you can feel a little bit more equipped when maybe your child does say that to you about something, maybe they're experiencing that themselves. So I think like educating yourself, and I wonder if also like churches could provide spaces for like parents to have those kind of conversations, or to take those risks to like, hey, we're doing a seminar about this, if there's specific people that want to have this conversation together, we're going to bring in an expert, someone who knows a little bit more to kind of shed some light to answer some of those questions.
For girls, there is a deep, I don't know if it's for all girls or just some girls, I'm not sure, but there's often a desire for relationship, a desire for being cared for and seen and beautiful. And I think the conversations I've had a lot have been, usually a lot of the discipleship conversations I've had in the past have been about who they want to date, right? So even outside of the very confusing gender identity, all of that stuff, even just like who they want to date is usually the conversation of like, what is actually most important? So it becomes a matter of values, less about the dating and more about the values, like what is important in your life. And usually what I find is the ones who are like, oh, I actually want to seek the Lord. Those other questions will answer as they seek the Lord. But the ones who are like, actually the most important thing I want right now is a boyfriend, that becomes a really dangerous slope for them to be on. And it puts them in a very strange place because they'll probably find one. Like that's the reality. If they want one, they'll probably find one. But whether that person will be good for them, whether that person will, even if they're a Christian, even if they're in the fellowship, right? Whether that person will actually like help them towards a healthier lifestyle, or if they just lose themselves and become this. I've just seen too many.
Yeah.
But I pay for your tuitions. I want to know whether you, what's your grade?
You know, because then it just feels like you're just spot checking, right? It's like you don't really care. They feel that way, right? Like feelings and reality. I mean, I think there's as Esther was alluding to, there's this in their freshman year, they're just overwhelmed with so many decisions and emotions and learning to process their feelings, you know, like outside the safety net of their family, their home.
I think that was something like I would encourage parents to think about, not just the bottom kind of minimal level, but how do we like keep thriving and keep like that level of questions. So I love what Josh is talking about, just like being intentional about questions. So I know that one parent right now, they call their son like almost every week, and there's like an update, and like I think they negotiated that before he went into college. So there was like an intentional like discussion about how are we gonna navigate our relationship before we get into college. So I think that was really.
You mentioned crisis. What happened when they have mental crisis? There again. College always have, you know, that kind of program that says if you depression, if you have all this thing, seek help.
If you know ahead of time, if there are history of kind of mental health issues, it's good to know that in advance so that maybe you can let the school know, number one, just kind of the school has information, and each school has like counselors and numbers and those types of resources. So I would say for parents to make sure like you know some of that history ahead of time so that you can access it, you can talk to the school administrators and advisors of those. Praying is for sure, definitely praying and having that level of just like emotional support for your child, maybe praying together on the phone, things like that. I would say also just like asking that question again, maybe being very intentional about how's your mental health doing, being very direct about it, trying to like get to the point about like how is that going, not trying to correct it again, not trying to fix it, but to really help them to talk through it, to navigate it, to encourage maybe the students. Sometimes the way that maybe they deal with it is just to be by themselves. So try to encourage them to go out, to like get out of your room. It's really easy to just stay in your dorm room and just play games or just do whatever you want to do, but just to get out of your room for even just 15 minutes, get some sun, take a walk, like some of those really basic things.
Sometimes mental health is, people are becoming more used to talking about it now, but for so long it's been such a quiet topic that even students themselves, when they're feeling something, or they're feeling panicked or depressed, they don't know what it is, or they're not able to say what it is themselves. So it's very difficult even for their friends to know, much less their parents, you know. So I think some of these things are that Will and Josh have been talking about like, oh, they need to know that they are loved and supported. They have people behind them. They do need to go outside more often. They need to go out and talk to people and not just hide in their room or not just hide in the library. They need to like, find healthy outlets. They need to exercise. They need to be in the sunlight. And I think that when crisis does come, they need to know that it's okay for them to go to counseling.
When I was pastoring in New York, there was at NYU, the library has, I think it's like 12 floors. And then they blocked off all 12 floors. It used to be open, but they put steel bars on it now. Because students, when they are about to graduate or they can't graduate, they had a rash series of suicides. They would just go to the top of the library and jump off. Now, and these are like super bright kids, right? They got into NYU, they're brilliant. And so the reminder is that, do we want our children or do we want a degree? The children have to feel comfortable. It's okay if you don't get a degree. Like, let me take care of you, right? Let me help you get back to mental, spiritual health, because that's more important at the end of the day, right? When Jesus comes back, all of our degrees mean nothing. All that is left is our relationship with him, our relationship with each other.
You see 10 kids going away to college. What's your statistic in how many that was when the parents are not there? Huh? They will continue.
I think it's like a 75, 80% attrition rate right now.
Loss rate?
Yeah. So the reason is, the biggest reason, and again, I'm not blaming parents. It's really that they don't see the presence of a living God at home. And again, it's not a critique. It's that we're not building in good, foundational issues. And it's not youth pastor related. It's not even church related. It's in the home. So it's like, we don't have enough God conversations at home. We sometimes feel like, well, it's enough. So I think a big part of that is, we have to have these conversations at home. Start earlier. I would say start in middle school. Like, what is God teaching you? I would recommend, parents, if you can, volunteer in youth group once a month, or go to English service, if you can. But have these conversations with them, pray with them, and care. We care a lot about our kids having academic success, but they're not seeing the same level of concern for their spiritual success,
But the parents would say, that's why we hire you.
Yeah. So I would say this is part of the issue that's wrong, right? Is that a youth pastor doesn't actually just lead youth. It's actually to lead the youth that are and their families. And so I think part of that is instilling that, youth ministry isn't about, fun and games. That's part of it, but a lot of it is equipping our children and then equipping the parents for that. I think all of the things that Will and Esther talked about, like the parents getting involved and having that conversation, actually, a lot of those is like, you have to build that relationship before, that summer of senior year, right? And so I would say for, the attrition rate is so high, but God is good, because we do see ministers like Will, like Esther on campus. We do see like the 80% that we lose, about 50% come back, right? And then, so those that are in church, actually, there's the great return. It's like in their late 20s, early 30s, especially when they have kids. They're like, what do we do with this? Okay, well, I was raised in church. Let's bring them back to church.
Well, I actually don't think of our roles as just trying to catch the 20%. I think of our jobs as we want to see all students on campus, whether they are churched or not churched, have an opportunity to encounter Jesus in their own way, through their friends, through each other. Now, with what that looks like is different depending on their background. So some students who come to us, we have had many students actually choose to follow Jesus in college. It is the greatest joy probably of my life to be able to walk with someone, hear them pray for the first time. That's amazing. And these are students who don't know Jesus at all, whose parents are not going to church, who've not taught them anything, right? And the question is, why? What is it that brings them to the Lord? And I really think it's the Holy Spirit. Like that's His job, to draw them to the Lord. And the funny thing is, those same people who come to Jesus, they might have been invited by their friend, which are these 20%, right? These church kids who are like, hey, I'm going to this thing, you want to come with me? To their roommate. And they don't even know what they're doing, but they're bringing their friend.
You open an insight for me. I always thought that your job is to save that 80% and somehow bring them back. You are actually leading others to
Yes.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, okay.
We
Well,
think
I
of
never
our job
thought
as
that.
missionaries, and we try to
That's
teach
right. Yeah.
that 80% who already know Jesus that actually they have more to share and there's more to learn.
Mhm.
And part of that learning is learning to share with your friend.
And then not only just to leave them at that, but also to encourage your children to think about, where are you sharing the gospel as well? Where are you telling others about Jesus? Where are you exploring your relationship with God with others? Because I think we get to grow and deepen our relationship with God as we share about it, especially with those who don't know Jesus. And so I think that's something, as I've shared with people, I'm like, oh yeah, does Jesus really say that? Or does he mean this? I think I've started to deepen my own faith as I've gotten to share as well. So, and we've seen that constantly with
All the
different
time.
students.
Are there tips? I knew that for my kids, that I connect them with Campus Crusade InterVarsity way before they go. And I told them, please don't tell my daughter, please don't tell my son that I make the phone call. But here's their email, and which you just reach out to them. And so when they got there, their first 5, 6, 7, 8 friends already Christians, and they were surrounded. Yeah.
Yeah, but that might
actually
backfire if the staff isn't wise. They're like, oh yeah, your dad told us to your son or your daughter will have zero trust in you.